Ready to dive into this one. The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. Ever feel like with personal finance, it's like 90% psychology?
Absolutely. Housel really nails it in this book. It's less about, being a spreadsheet whiz and more about understanding the stuff we don't even realize is affecting our money decisions, those invisible forces.
Yeah, those invisible forces are what I'm most curious about. What's
Yeah.
an example from the book that really stuck with you?
Well, how about we kick things off with Ronald Reed? Housel starts the book with him. This guy, he worked as a janitor his whole life, lived super frugally, and he died a multimillionaire.
Right, a quiet millionaire. What's crazy is it wasn't an inheritance or some lottery win, just decades of like smart under the radar investing.
And you know what's wild? It's not even just the amount he had. It's that no one knew. Drove a used car, wore simple clothes. Really makes you think about what wealth actually looks like, right? It's not always flashy.
It's like that saying, the best way to become a millionaire is to make $1 billion and then start a tech company. Everyone focuses on the tech part, but that quiet wealth building beforehand, that's the real story. So we've got this idea that time and consistency are key. What else did Housel talk about?
Well, he makes this distinction between being rational with money and being reasonable. And he actually argues that a lot of times trying to be perfectly rational can backfire on you.
Oh, that's interesting. I'd think rationality would be the goal. What's the difference there, and why is reasonable better?
So think about it rational. It's all about cold calculations, right? Ignoring emotions, basically like a computer program for your money. But we're humans, not robots. Life happens, we get emotional, and sticking to some rigid plan, it gets hard. You might even make impulsive decisions because of it. Reasonable, though, it kind of acknowledges that life's messy. It's about finding what works for you, your personality, how much risk you can handle, your own goals.
That makes sense.
But are there examples in the book of this backfiring? Like, it's one thing to say be reasonable. It's another to actually see it play out.
Oh, yeah, totally. How Housel talks about this guy, Harry Markowitz. He won a Nobel Prize, basically for inventing modern portfolio theory.
Mm-hmm.
Super brilliant when it comes to the math of investing.
So you'd think he'd have the most complex investment strategy in the world.
Right. But you know what he did with his own money? Divided it equally between his investments. Said trying to be perfectly rational with it was too emotionally draining.
Wow. So even geniuses struggle with this. Honestly, makes me feel a bit better about my own financial anxieties.
And that's exactly Housel's point. It's not about being perfectly rational. It's about finding what you can stick with and still sleep at night.
Which makes me think about something else from the book Housel talks about how much we rely on history to try and predict the future with money, even though that can be really misleading. What's that all about? He calls it the historians as prophets fallacy. Basically, it's like assuming what worked in the past will just repeat itself perfectly in the markets. But here's the thing. The world changes. Technology, industries, new ideas. What worked even a few decades ago might be totally obsolete now.
So, like, blindly following those historical trends without understanding why they happened, that's dangerous.
Exactly. Think about the rise of index funds that's relatively new. Or venture capital funding all these startups that wasn't even a thing a few decades back. If all you looked at was past performance, you'd miss out on these whole categories.
It's like trying to navigate a new city using a map from like 50 years ago. Sure, some landmarks might be the same, but you're going to get lost if you don't know how things have changed.
Exactly. And this ties into another fascinating thing. Housel gets into the whole seductive nature of pessimism, especially when we're talking about money.
Pessimism being seductive, that's so true though. It's like the people who are always predicting doom and gloom, they sound so sure of themselves, even if they're wrong half the time. But why are we drawn to it, especially with money?
It's funny, isn't it? It's almost like a paradox. Housel says pessimism often sounds smarter, like more sophisticated. If you're cautious, always warning about what could go wrong, you sound like you've, really thought things through, more than someone who's just like sunshine and rainbows about everything.
Right, optimism can sound naive.
Yeah.
But isn't that a problem then, if it makes us miss out on opportunities?
Totally. He gives the example of Japan after World War II.
Wow.
Talk about devastation, right? If there was ever a time to be pessimistic, that was it. But what happened? They had this unbelievable economic miracle in the decades after.
It's true. Proof that things are rarely as bleak as they feel at the moment. Even in the darkest times, there's potential for, like, huge growth and progress.
100%. And, that makes me think about something else Housel brings up, this idea of the you in 20 years problem. Like, how do you plan for a future you when that future you might be totally different.
Right, it's like you're picking out clothes for a stranger. What we care about at 20 is totally different than 40 or 60.
It is. Priorities change, goals change. If you make a rigid financial plan based on who you are now, you're kind of setting yourself up to be frustrated later.
So should we just give up on long-term planning altogether?
Not necessarily. It's more about building in some wiggle room and realizing that it's not a failure to revisit your goals and adjust your plans. It's actually smart, you know? Think about it like sailing. Yeah, you chart a course, but you're constantly adjusting the sails based on the wind, the waves.
I like that analogy. So it's more about being adaptable, like responding to what happens and not being afraid to deviate from the plan.
Exactly. And that actually makes me think about another point. Housel really drives home the whole idea of what you don't see when it comes to wealth.
Oh yeah, this is one of my favorite parts. It's not about the fancy stuff, but the stuff you don't buy, the things you say no to because of what it lets you do later.
It's like that saying, the foundation of a house, you don't see it, but it's what holds the whole thing up. That's what real wealth can be like. It's that ability to say no, to walk away from something tempting because it doesn't fit into your bigger picture.
So it's about having the discipline to delay gratification, even when it feels like everyone else is indulging.
Yeah, and that delayed gratification, that's where the real power comes in. You're not trapped by debt. You've got options. You can take risks others can't. That's freedom, you know?
It's like you're building this reserve of financial energy, and then you can use that energy to fuel your dreams, your goals, whatever you want, not what someone else says you should want.
Totally. And that actually reminds me of something else Housel calls the man in the car paradox.
Okay, that sounds interesting. What's that about?
So think about it, right? You see someone driving a fancy car, you automatically assume they're successful, maybe even happy, right? But Housel says, a lot of times, that guy in the car, he's busy being envious of someone else for totally different reasons. Like, we're all chasing different versions of success.
It's like that constant comparison game. We hit one goal, and we're immediately looking at what someone else has that we don't.
And that's a recipe for never feeling satisfied, right? Reminds us that happiness isn't some finish line you cross once you have enough money. Real fulfillment, it comes from making sure your money decisions line up with your values, your passions, your own definition of a life well lived.
Such a good point. It also makes me think of something else Housel said about how nothing's free when it comes to money. What did he mean by that?
It's like every financial decision has a cost, even if you don't see it right away. That new gadget might seem awesome, but what are you giving up to get it? Maybe it's the opportunity to invest that money, let it grow over time.
Or even just the mental energy you spend worrying about whether you can afford it or not.
Exactly. Think about it with bigger things too, like jobs. Sure, that high-paying job seems great, but what if it means less time with your family or giving up on something you're passionate about? Housel's saying that understanding the real cost of our decisions, the financial and the less obvious ones, that's crucial.
It's about making choices that truly fit with your values and what matters most to you, even if they don't always make sense on paper.
100%. And that ties into another big takeaway from the psychology of money, this idea of savings.
Right, but he doesn't mean just like hoarding cash under your mattress.
No, exactly. He talks about savings as creating options for yourself in the future. It's about having the freedom to pursue different opportunities, to deal with unexpected stuff, and to make choices based on what you want, not just what your bank account dictates.
So it's about having that safety net, that cushion, so you can take risks, make changes, and all that.
Exactly. And that ties into something else fascinating. He explores the whole role of luck and chance in our financial lives.
It's easy to think we've got more control over our finances than we actually do.
Oh, totally. We love to take credit when things go well and blame bad luck when they don't. But Housel challenges that, you know? He says that, yeah, our choices matter, but luck plays a way bigger role than we often admit.
So it's about being a little more humble, accepting that you can't control every outcome, and just focusing on what you can influence: your choices, your habits, how you react to the unexpected.
Exactly. And that leads us to another key takeaway from the book, the importance of having that long-term perspective, especially when it comes to investing.
It's so easy to get caught up in the day-to-day, right? Like the headlines, the market going up and down.
Yeah.
But zooming out, thinking long-term, that's got to be important.
Oh, it's huge. Housel says it's like you're so busy looking at the waves crashing on the shore, you totally miss the tide coming in and out. That short-term stuff, it's distracting. And if you're trying to build wealth, it can even hurt.
So instead of trying to time the market perfectly or jump on whatever the hot stock is this week, It's more about riding those longer-term waves.
Exactly. It's about trusting that over time, the economy grows, businesses figure things out, and if you've made smart investments, they grow too. He compares it to planting a tree. You don't see huge growth overnight, but with time and some care, that tree's going to be giving you shade and fruit for years to come.
Okay, I like that. I can use that. I'm picturing that tree getting stronger over time, able to handle a few storms. But this whole long-term mindset thing, that can't be easy. Any advice from Halotl on how to actually do that?
One thing he talks about is making sure you're finding some joy in the process. It's easy to fall into that trap of always delaying gratification. Like you're sacrificing today for some future version of yourself that might not even want that thing anymore.
Right. What am I saving up for a yacht for if future me would rather use that money to travel the world or something?
Exactly. It's more about making choices today that line up with what you care about now, finding ways to make the present moment good, even while you're working towards those bigger goals.
Man, this whole conversation has been really eye-opening. Any final words of wisdom from the book before we wrap up our deep dive here?
It all comes back to what we were saying earlier. Wealth is often what you don't see. It's the fancy cars you didn't buy, the trips you didn't take, because you chose to prioritize something else. It's not about deprivation, it's about being intentional.
So true. It's about having the freedom to choose what really matters to you, not what everyone else says should matter.
100%. And at the end of the day, remember, this is a personal journey. Your definition of success, how much risk you can handle, your goals, they're all unique to you. Don't let anyone tell you there's only one right way to manage your money.
Love that. Well, that about wraps it up for this deep dive into the psychology of money. Really makes you think it's so much more than just like numbers on a spreadsheet, isn't it? It's about understanding yourself, your own behaviors, and using that to build the kind of life you want.
Couldn't agree more.